Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, I'm joined by Alan Lazaros. He is the founder, co-host, CEO of the Next Level University website and title are different. And if I had done pre-production, I would have asked about that, but we don't do that here. We're very disorganized. And so, what we're doing today is we're going to talk about his work in coaching and all this type of thing and learn about him and where he came from and how he got here and how he got into this business. He was one of my folks from Matchmaker and wanted really to talk about life after corporate and reaching your peak performance, all that sort of optimization stuff that is always ever so popular right now. And as people can tell if they're watching the video on YouTube, Alan is young and white and thin and his hair looks great and thank goodness he's slumming it down with us ogres. So we're going to find out what he's up to and go from there. So welcome, Alan, to the Cameron Journal podcast.
Thank you for having me. I do not take it lightly to speak into the lives of other people. I started listening to podcasts 9 years ago, and I would hear these people, and they sounded so articulate, and they sounded like they had it all figured out, and they were such great communicators. And now I'm very grateful. It was my dream to become one of those people. And so if I sound like I have it all figured out, trust me, I didn't always. And I certainly still don't, and I'm still growing and evolving as much as possible. But I'm very grateful and honored to be here because when you have someone's ear, you also have their mind, and the things that we allow into our mind do really change the way we think and the way we act and the way we live. And it really does change the trajectory of your life. So I'm grateful to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. So, well, why don't we start from the very beginning? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, and we'll go from there.
So, the very beginning. So, I often joke. I say I'm hoping to hit puberty by 36. I'm 35. I look 12. But
I turned 36 this year and I had a guest comment. He thought I was in my mid-20s. I said, well, my skincare routine thanks you.
yeah, nice. Very nice. Yeah, yeah. I take real good care of it and just genetics, I guess, right? So, just lucky. But so to take you back through I have a short version, I have a mid version, I have a long version. You mentioned this being a 45-minute or so interview, so I'll give some context. I do think it's important. And the first thing again I want to say is I didn't have any of this figured out at the time. I have since rewatched the movie of my own life, reread the book of my own life, so to speak. It's kind of like when you're a kid and you see Finding Nemo and then you see it again as an adult and you go, oh, got it. Okay, now I get that joke. Now I understand that reference. Now I know the moral of the story, that kind of thing. So it's been a lot of that because I started doing some therapy in my 30s and I started reflecting on my life a lot. And I feel like I'm starting to really understand it at a deeper level. So I was born into challenge and adversity for sure. When I was 2 years old, my father passed away in a car accident when he was 28 years old. I had an older sister who was 6 at the time. My mom was 31. She was a stay-at-home mom, and my dad was the breadwinner, so to speak. And then my stepdad came into the picture. So my real last name actually is McCorkle. My birth father, John McCorkle, was a part of a big Irish Catholic family. My mom and papa, his parents, his mom and dad, my grandparents, had 6 kids. So it was Jim, Joe, John, Jane, Joan, Jeanette. So it was 6 kids, all J. And so when my stepdad came into the picture and I changed my name to Lazarus, we were kind of being the Lazaruses. So we didn't really associate a ton with the McCorkles. And when my stepdad left when I was 14 years old, this was the hardest year of my life, although I didn't realize that really until later on in my 30s. But when I was 14, I playfully refer to 3 to 14 of my life as boats and BS. So my stepdad had motorcycles and snowmobiles, and we took ski trips, and we had a yacht. He worked for a company called AGFA during the dot-com bubble in the mid to late 90s, early 2000s, and we did very well financially as a family. At least it seemed that way. My mom drove a BMW, that kind of thing, sort of upper middle class. But my mom and my stepdad did not get along, and that's the most polite way I can possibly put it. And so when I was 14, he left my family. He took his entire extended family with him, my grandma Joan, grandpa George, all that. and I haven't seen a single one of them since. I've talked to my stepdad a little bit on Facebook Messenger, but not much, and we haven't seen each other in person since. Now, that same year, my sister moves out with her older boyfriend. Understandable. And that same year, my mom gets in a fight with her sister, my Aunt Sandy, and then my Aunt Sandy kind of ostracizes us from that side of the family. And I've since only seen one of them, and that was 8 years later. And so I kind of lost three families by the time I'm 14 years old. And
You're
fortunately, the
putting the
McCorkles,
fun
my
in dysfunctional.
it was not, it was a lot of loss. It was a lot of a loss in a very short amount of time. And again, at the time, I didn't really understand any of this. It was just life, right?
Right.
And so, fortunately, the McCorkles kind of welcomed us back, and it was kind of for them like seeing a ghost because I looked just like my dad. But they were very warm and loving, and I've spent a lot of time with them since. But at the end of the day, when my stepdad left, he took 90% of the income with him. And so I went from Xbox, Dreamcast, upper middle class, excited to go to college, to free lunch at school because our income was so low, and shopping at Salvation Army and stuff like that. And it's a very my mom traded in her BMW, got a Honda like Civic, and it's just it was a different dynamic. And I didn't know what to do. And so I did the only thing I knew how to do, which was a trauma response. And now I realize this. The four trauma responses are fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. I didn't know what fawn was. And so socially, I would fawn and try to fit in for love. Didn't know that was happening at the time. But behind the scenes by myself, I would just do the only thing I knew how to do, which was work harder, aim higher, get smarter. And so I got straight A's through all of high school because my dream was to go to WPI, Worcester Polytechnic Institute, kind of like a mini MIT in Massachusetts. And it's $50,000 a year back then. And I wanted to be a computer engineer. And I didn't know how I was going to go to school because we didn't have the money. So what I did was I just bootstrapped my way through high school, and I got straight A's. So I got something called the President's Award, which is behind me, signed by George W. Bush, that essentially states that I got a 95 or above GPA, straight A grade point average for all four report cards, all 4 years, 16 report cards straight. And um, I got 189 in honors English. And luckily it was weighted because it was an honors class. And then I never took honors English again. I was more of a math and science guy. But anyways, I get into WPI. I go for computer engineering. And then I get my MBA, my master's in business. And because I got all scholarships and financial aid, I was able to go to school. And then I went into corporate, which you had mentioned, the corporate stuff. And by that point, from 14 to like 21-ish, 20-ish, I was kind of broke. But after that, computer engineering with a master's in business, the whole economy needs engineers, right? Especially in tech companies. So I just got very sought after. It was interesting for me to go from not sought after at all to very sought after. So I went from 65K a year to 85, 85 to 105, 105 to 125. And then I eventually landed at almost $200,000 a year in my mid 20s. And I worked for a bunch of different companies. iRobot, Pico Safety Products, Sensata Technologies, company called Cognex. I eventually landed at a bunch of Simplex Grinnell, a bunch of different tech companies. And Cognex was the main one that I landed at last. And we sold industrial automation equipment into manufacturing facilities all across the world. It was kind of like machine vision, which is the eyes of a robot. So picture this camera with software behind it that measures the microphone and measures the quality assurance of products going down a line. So I started a little inside sales engineering team at Cognex. Then I was promoted to outside sales. And so my territory was Connecticut, Vermont, and Western Massachusetts. On the road, doing very well, but definitely partying too much, drinking too much and too often. I had high school friends and college friends and corporate friends, and I was definitely spread too thin. Everything for everyone, not anything for myself. Didn't realize it at the time, hadn't faced my trauma and pain and loss and that kind of thing. And then I get in my own car accident. So that was the turning point for me. So I'm 26. I'm up in New Hampshire with my little cousin. We're not partying or drinking or anything, but we're playing Call of Duty, and then we go to TGI Fridays. I was driving a 2004 Volkswagen Passat that I bought in 5 grand cash because I wanted to get out of debt and start an investment account. So I paid off 84 grand worth of debt in a single year. I had 150 grand in a Vanguard account with all tech companies that I knew would grow. And I was just the American dream, quote unquote. but I was unfulfilled. Super successful, but deeply unfulfilled. Just didn't know it. So we're in New Hampshire, and thank you, Volkswagen, because the car was, I used to call it the tank. It was a really heavy German engineered car, and I used to actually call this thing the tank. I used to call it a steel trap, and it definitely saved my life. So I'm in New Hampshire. I was supposed to yield, but the snowbanks were covering the yield signs in that bad 2015 winter. And I end up on the wrong side of the road. And I look up and I see what I thought was a Mack truck right in front of me. And I thought for sure, that's it. There's no possibility that this is not the end. Fortunately, two things. One, the Volkswagen Passat, the airbags deployed and it was a tank of a car. So thank you, Volkswagen. Number two, it was not a Mack truck. It was a lift kitted pickup truck. There's a lot of those up in New Hampshire. And so my cousin and I, he was 17, second cousin, and he hurt his knee on the airbag. I hurt my face on the airbag, but physically we were okay. But this was the second chance my dad never got. I've seen the pictures of his car because he died at 28. I'm 26 at the time, going, my car doesn't look very different. And so I just questioned everything. I questioned my life. I questioned my worth. I questioned my mission, my goals. What's the point? What's the meaning? What if that was it? And I was just flooded with regret. And I don't think I made poor choices compared to most, statistically speaking. I just think that I wasn't living in alignment with my true self. I was burying most of the pain I hadn't dealt with, most of the loss I hadn't dealt with. And I was professionally developed and I was improvement developed and I was achievement oriented, but I wasn't self improvement oriented. And so that's when I flipped the script. I got obsessed with self improvement. And I think that's probably an understatement at this point. This was 9 years ago. And I started a company based on holistic self improvement. And I started reading every book I could get my hands on. And I started getting into fitness. And I was a fitness coach and a fitness model and a fitness competitor. And I just started getting my life together. And so the best way I can describe it now, and again, believe it or not, that's the short version. The best I can describe it now is I was successful and professionally developed and achievement oriented before the car accident, but I was deeply unfulfilled. And then I flipped the script and I went all the way past broke and went into debt, starting my own company. And I was super fulfilled and super internally developed and well developed, but I was unsuccessful. And then eventually now I'm grateful to say I'm both successful and fulfilled. And I think that's what we all ultimately want to get to. Um, and now I just realize that courage is the way, and you have to have courage to be who you really are. And that's really hard, especially socially, if you don't feel loved or accepted.
Well, oh, where do I start with this one? All right. So I'm just going to be true confessions time. So, um, longtime listeners will know I frequently have a long parade of coaches and people and whatnot who come through and they're hawking their book or whatever have you. And those interviews are very pro forma. And so that's a lot. I was not prepared for that at all. I definitely had a very different interview in mind. I thought, oh, this one should be easy. He's just one of these coaching types. Half hour, 45 minutes. He'll do his shtick. We'll send him on his way, and I'll send him his episode in a couple of weeks. Um, that's an emotional journey, all by itself. And there's a lot there, a lot to unpack. I'll start in the way I usually do with some autistic empathy, which means I tell a short story about how our lives are similar. Um, Longtime listeners will know. I'm also had a kind of a stepdad, stepfamily situation. My mom had me from a previous relationship and then married my dad when I was 5. So I didn't meet my father till I was 23. And that was I met him, didn't tell my mother for 5 years. That was a lot of drama and a lot of yelling and screaming. That was an interesting day. And and when she asked, why didn't you tell me? I said, hear you yelling? That would be why I was trying to not do this with you. Um, and unfortunately, unlike you, I have never been terribly successful and I've never made a lot of money. Um, I spent most of my 20s in therapy doing lots and lots of trauma work and lots and lots of spiritual work to try to fix myself, only to get diagnosed with autism when I was 32, almost 33. And that was 3 years ago. And so it's been a rather interesting ride. Unlike while being overeducated, I unfortunately never could hack it in anything corporate. I graduated in the recession, of course, and nobody was interested for a very long time. And I worked in nightlife and I worked in magazines and fashion and that sort of thing for a long time. And unfortunately, that business collapsed due to some theft. And so I moved to Seattle and kind of started over and then began writing books and starting what we now know as the Cameron Journal. Um, and that was 10 years ago. The Cameron Journal turns, 10 in November, and this iteration turns
Congrats.
6 in November.
Congrats. That's
And
huge.
so yeah, so now we published 3 books, and I have 2 more coming out this fall and all this sort of thing. Um, and so it's yeah, that's so I guess my first question as someone who has never had it together, never gonna have it together because that's just not how my brain works. I'm glad yours does. In those early days after the car accident, I am a testimony to the German engineering. I owned 2 Audis and worked at a foreign auto at a German specialty car shop for years and years.
Nice.
When I was writing, I was the parts man. I didn't even really have an official desk. I literally sometimes worked out of the front seat of my car. Because the shop was very small, and so there was just one kind of old computer in the shop, and so I would just kind of work from whatever space I could carve out of the office. And in those first early days after the accident, how did you decide to turn everything around, and what were the first steps that you took? Because I think a lot of people have that big inflection moment and then don't know what to do with it, is why I'm
Oh yeah.
asking.
And I didn't either. I mean, the the thing that I think is very obvious is that there's pros and cons to everything. And the advantage of the car accident is that was sort of my quarter life existential crisis. And by existential, what I mean is what is the purpose? What is the point? What means I think orienting your life around meaning is really important. And I realized that a lot of what I invested time and effort in was very meaningless relationships, meaningless, that kind of stuff. And so all of us are, and I use this analogy, it's kind of a weird analogy, but like I think birds should be birds, and I think zebras should be zebras, and I think lions should be lions and that kind of thing. And it's an interesting metaphor, but the hardest thing, ironically, in life is to be as your true self. And the reason why is because of social acceptance and belonging as a tribal species. So the answer to your question, how did I get it together? Two sides of this coin. The one is post traumatic stress disorder, which is a very real thing. And I, after my car accident, had some of that. Double yellow lines scared me. I was claustrophobic. I remember I had used to have to puff my chest up and like walk in and out of doorways to try to exposure therapy myself back. Crowds were bothering me after that car accident. Like I had a really hard time after that car accident. And I think it's important to note that. But simultaneously, what I don't think is talked about enough personally is post traumatic growth, which is the phoenix of my ego up to that point, which was an overcompensation for a lack of belonging or a lack of love or abandonment issues, whatever you want to call it, burnt to the ground. So it was the phoenix, my ego burnt to the ground. It was all the humble pie at once. Because when you face mortality, what else is there? So I had to rebuild my identity from the ground up based on, and it's just a way more authentic version of me. Because trying to fit in and trying to, there's a great quote that my business partner Kevin said. He said, "You're either afraid that all of you is not enough, or you're afraid that all of you is too much." I'm afraid that all of me is too much. Even on this interview, I've been a little insecure about you being insecure about my type A achieverness. I mean, people like you and I tend to differ in our orientation of work ethic and discipline and achievements and goals and all that kind of stuff. But I think that we can collaborate and cooperate, and I think we can have a really cool conversation. But if I trigger your insecurities and you lash out at me, I'm going to feel unlovable, and that's going to make me insecure, and then I'm going to avoid you, and it's going to be a whole thing. So being yourself takes a ton of courage, because the truth is I am like this. I actually am really hardworking. I do want to work every day for the rest of my life for the most part. I do podcasting, coaching, speaking, training, and writing every single day other than Sunday. And 6 and 1 is my sort of tempo. But the old me didn't realize that I was afraid to say that, and I was afraid to be that, because it warrants challenge. Like a lot of people want to butt heads with someone who they're insecure around, and I appreciate you not doing that. But at the end of the day, I was a deeply fearful person. I just didn't identify with the fears other people have. Like I was never afraid to give a speech. I was never afraid to not be good enough. I was never afraid to not be smart enough. I was never afraid I wasn't competent at stuff. So I had competence courage, which I think is like apply to the job, apply to the school, shoot for the goal. The goals always came really easy to me. What didn't come easy to me is fitting in, belonging, being liked. I've never felt very likable. And unfortunately, my fear of being disliked created an ego that made me less likable.
Well, yes. I similar issues, but the opposite. I and I always kind of joke about this. When I say everyone, I said the person that you know as me is actually incredibly manufactured. I was not an ambitious child. I was content to sit in the corner and read books. I was that guy. Um, there's an aspect of autism where we kind of live in our own heads and our own imagination, and I was that kid. I was not on the planet. My grandma literally used to like grab my head physically and point it at things because I was not paying attention to the world around me. I was not conscious of the world or people. I was not in touch. Um, and my social awareness was quite low well into my 20s. And it's still not perfect. And and my art mentor worked with me a lot on that. Unfortunately, not in a very positive way, in a very abusive way, which became a whole therapy thing. And it was, yeah, and my therapist also knew my art mentor as a friend, so that kind of became a little fun. Um, for a while at small town. And so I went to a small college town. And so I was never terribly ambitious. When I was 18, I wanted to move to New York City, never drive a car and become an interior designer because I think I just wanted to be Grace Adler from Will and Grace. Like that was my little plan. I didn't really have, anything beyond that. I wanted to live in the pages. I loved magazines, why I worked in magazines for so long. um and I just wanted to live in the pages of Vogue. I remember this one woman was writing a story about how she had moved to Africa and she had divorced her husband and was trying to decide if she should return to Paris or New York, and I said, yeah, that's the life I want to live. Like, I want to write for Vogue and I want to decide if I should live in Paris or New York. Those are the problems I want to have. um and never haven't gotten there, probably never will, but at 17 that seemed like a nice idea. And so yeah, so it's kind of, so I was never that too ambitious. When I was 13, I figured out that if I wanted people to like me or pay attention to me, I had to do something in the world that wasn't in my own brain, because nobody really wanted to sit around and talk about ideas. Ironically, the reason why I have a podcast is I love talking about ideas with people and I love talking about stories, all this type of thing. And
Nice.
doing the podcast is one of the few things I do that I actually enjoy doing. Um,
Nice.
Especially when I can have a good conversation with someone. We just posted an episode I had with Richard Walter, who is the head of the screenwriting department at UCLA, and we got to talk about stories and storytelling in films for an hour.
I
And it
saw some of
was
that.
Yes, and it was one of the most enjoyable interviews I'd ever done. Um, and that's why I texted someone. I said, today's one of the few days I actually like what I do, because I got to talk to someone really awesome and really elite. We talked about film, we talked about stories. It was really great.
I love film and
Um,
storytelling, by the way. So if you want to go down there, I can. I definitely can.
Yeah, and so I kind of sort of started manufacturing a personality. I read Dale Carnegie, How to Win, Make Friends, Influence People.
Yep.
Like I was at the library being like, I'd best, read up how to be basically how to become a person in the world sort of thing. Um, and then, fast forward, you know, 10 years later, I am all of a sudden working in nightlife and I'm around, beautiful, gorgeous Russian women who barely speak English, um, and all this sort of thing. And I'm all of a sudden in these places and spaces at a very young age talking to women who would never give me the type of day because I'm a huge chubby brown dude and, these girls weigh a buck 10 and, every businessman in the city's after them. And all of a sudden those are my friends now. Like, and I'm standing in a fashion fitting room surrounded by women in their underwear sort of thing. Um, and we're producing a magazine, we're taking photos, and I go to nightclubs and I get in just because of who I am and who I work for. At one point, even my dad was like, you're famous in like nightclubs, right? I'm like, sometimes in some places. He's kind of like, your mother and I would like to go to a nightclub. Can you do that for us? And I'm kind of like, actually, yes, yes, I can do that for you. Um, and I got to go to one of the biggest dance music festivals in the world and got to hang out with DJs and all this type of thing. And it was really cool. And when that came to an end, I moved to Washington and lived a whole other different life. And that's not what I do now. Um, and it was kind of, but for me, it was kind of a pinnacle achievement because it was kind of like, oh, I finally figured out a personality that works sort of thing, and
Mm.
the people kind of want to like me and hang around. But still, even so, like I'm still incredibly self-deprecating, which is evidenced by how I've conducted this interview. um and it's still something where, I think I definitely still struggle with that whole likability angle, even though, as I've gotten older and wiser and figured more things out and all this sort of thing, and kind of gotten better at it sort of thing. It's still something where I tend to, how did Wade put it the other day? He called it reverse narcissism in the other direction. So most narcissists big up their ego, which betrays their own internal insecurity. Um, I kind of do the opposite. I kind of lead with the insecurity, that maybe is hiding something else. I don't think it's hiding anything else, but that's his opinion. Um,
Yeah.
and so now at present, I'm kind of in a place, in a space, in a situation where, for better or for worse, that doesn't really work anymore, even in this moment. So like I was kind of, laughing that you called me out and said how awkward it was for you the way I did this sort of thing. Um, Mostly because I just wasn't prepared to have this conversation today. And so now today, presently we're recording on the 14th of June, 2024. Yeah, I think that's something that I have to change. I don't think that sort of work. I'm getting to the place where it doesn't work anymore. Does that make sense?
Well,
I know that sounds strange.
I use age because I'm a numbers thinker, which
Yeah.
also I hid for a long time. So I think there's four
Yeah.
modalities of thinking. I think there's words and concepts. That's the most common, I think. Uh,
Yeah.
some is images and pictures. It sounds like that's yours based on the art in the background and stuff like that. And then you've got energy, so intuitive and energy. And then you've got math, rationality, science, and logic. So mine is that one, and that's the rarest statistically speaking. That's why engineers usually have low self-worth in the corner by themselves,
Yeah.
while the athletes get all the girls. You know what I'm saying? I'm kidding.
Yeah.
But the point is
No, no, it's much easier if you can throw a ball or do something that people can watch out in the world. That's why I did music. I was a musician first.
got it.
That was what I did in high school. I won Colorado State Flute Award, which you have to win your category first place for 3 times in a row, and I didn't start till I was 15. So I had to win every single year all the way through. Did it, got my trophy. It was great. Um,
Nice.
and yeah, and then when I was in college, I was a stand-up comedian. Then I became a headlining stand-up comedian in the local Denver market for a long time and used to do tours around Colorado and all this type of thing.
Cool.
Yeah, so I that was how I kind of solved the I have to get out of my head and do things in the world problem, is
Yeah.
I went for performance art. So I did theater and I produced theater, and
What
then
did you
I
think of
did Denver
theater? That
Fashion
sounds
Week.
awesome.
Yeah, and I got to there was this great old playhouse in Colorado called Heritage Square, and I got to work with them, and they were a group of actors that had been together for like 25 years, so it was like joining a family sort of thing.
Wow.
And that was really great. I got to do a bunch of other shows. The last show I did was 12 Angry Men in 2013.
Really?
Yeah, and so
Nice.
I did makeup for film and television for a long time. I won awards for makeup in film, in
Nice.
independent film, all this. So that's how I kind of solved it is I have no athletic ability whatsoever, like at all. And so I went for performing arts was
But
what
you're
I did.
super creative because you're in your own head and you're creating stuff and then you put it out in the world. So you're very creative.
Well, yes, and that was where, for me, the whole writing thing came about of I have all these stories that I kind of want to tell sort of thing. And that can we didn't have podcasting as an audio medium. If I were 10 years younger, I probably would write like podcast dramas or something.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but I at that time we didn't really have it. It was, it was writing books, and that's how I started, writing and then
Is
and
your
I
books are they fiction books or are they nonfiction?
both.
You've done both.
Yes, so my first book was What the Hell is Going On? A Primer to Our World in the Age of Trump. The reissue's coming out in September called What the Hell is Going On Post-COVID Edition. And then I
Wow.
wrote two books of fiction, Cast Iron, which is about a young man who kills his stepfather with a cast iron frying pan for molesting his sister in his life afterwards. And then I did a short story collection called An Unfinished Coloring Book, which is a series of my own short stories on a variety of matters from the opioid crisis to the California housing crisis. In fact, the story about the California housing crisis, Beverly Gardens, appeared in 34th Parallel magazine. Unfortunately, it had the worst release month in human history because it came out in March of 2020, as did my short
Got it.
story collection. And I'd released the novel 3 months before. They were meant to kind of come out together to kind of get the fiction career off the ground. Then the pandemic happened, and that was the end of that. So yeah, but yeah, so that's how and Cast Iron took me 10 years to write. I was 19 years old, and one of my helpers at this restaurant I was working at told me a story very similar to the one I wrote. And I just kind of held on to that story. And then in 2013, 2014, I started writing it. And then
Cool.
in 2020, it came out. So that story had been a part of my life
Of
for a
all the
long
performing
time.
arts you've done, the music, the instrument, the theater, the storytelling, the writing, the if you've ever done any film, like of all the performing arts, what's your favorite?
I think music is always my first love. I still have my flute. Every once in a while, people will get me to do a performance. I did some church stuff for a while. I was a gigging musician in college. I did the nursing home circuit, which will
Cool.
also help my stand up because I would tell jokes that were funny to the generation of people in the nursing home. So my grandma grew up during World War II, and so I had lots of like 30s, 40s period jokes, which when you're
Cool.
at the nursing home and these are all greatest in silence and you make a Harry Truman joke, it works. And so make an Eisenhower joke, it works. And
Nice.
so yeah,
Whereas
so I
now no
would
one knows what you're talking about.
no, those jokes are so irrelevant. But at the nursing home in 2008, they killed.
They
And
crushed. Nice.
and I think people were impressed. This young guy knows about any of this stuff, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um, and so
So how
so
so I'm at the three
I think
point
music will always be my first home. So I started playing when I was 7 years old. I still have my flute. I did a couple church gigs a couple years ago. Every once in a great while, I will still break out and play a little bit.
it's
And
awesome.
so yeah, so I think music will always be on the performing arts. That would always be my first love, you
So
know.
Cameron, real quick, the point I made about the modalities of thinking, I'm a numbers thinker. I think of 3.5 version of Alan. So I used to think, and in the self-improvement space, when I first found self-improvement, I always thought like, okay, here's where I am now, and I can get here and I can achieve this and I can become this person. I don't think like that anymore. I've learned over the years coaching. I have a 10,000 hour tracker of coaching, podcasting, speaking, training, and writing. And I don't say that to brag. I say that so you know I'm not just talking. I have the data. All different industries, all different countries. I have 26 people on my roster right now. Youngest is 18, oldest is 63. And what you learn from coaching is all these different walks of life, and there's certain fundamentals that we all have in common. Like the two types of courage. One of is social courage, people who feel like they don't fit in. And the other one is competence courage. They feel like they're not capable enough. So, and some of us have both. Mine is mostly social courage. So for me, vulnerability isn't stepping on stage. Vulnerability is being honest about how I don't struggle with self doubt. because most people are like, what a liar or whatever, that kind of thing. Or at
Mm,
least that's my fear.
yeah.
So the point that I'm making though is I now think this way where I uncover who I really am and then I try to be the best version of that and I try to improve that from that place. Good, bad, ugly, own who I really am, have the courage and humility and vulnerability to be that both in private and in public and amplify that light metaphorically. And that's what I do with my clients now too. And the way that I think about that is in numbers. So I'm 35 years old. So this is the 3.5 version of Alan Lazarus. And people ask me, well, why don't you go back to McCorkle, your real last name? And I say, because that's part of my story. I don't
I
feel the
never changed
need.
my name when I met my father, and because I said I'm not paying to redo all the branding. It's Cameron
Yeah,
Cowan.
yeah,
We're sticking
nice.
with it. I
That's
refuse
also
to
part
pay
of
to
it
have
too.
everything redone.
Well, the other, yeah, same, same. But the real thing underneath that though is it's an authentic burn down the Phoenix, rebuild it, burn down the Phoenix, rebuild it, burn down the Phoenix, rebuild it. And we are all updating and improving, hopefully over time, becoming more and more and more of our authentic selves. And the 3.5 version of Alan is different than the 3.4, and the 3.6 will be different than that. And so for you, the question becomes, Cameron, what is the, how old are you?
36.
36. Okay, so you and I similar ages. And where are you from?
That
Washington.
I'm originally from Denver, and then I grew up in Arkansas for a little bit, and then back to Colorado, and then Seattle, and now here
Okay,
in
yep, got it.
Wilmington,
Okay, so
Delaware.
U
Yeah.
US homegrown, same
Yep.
type of thing.
Mhm.
So and obviously we were both into film and stuff like that. But so I am 3.5 version, you're 3.6 version of Cameron. And the question becomes, what is the best 3.6 version of Cameron now? Not who you used to be, but who you are now. Now, I always ask people this in my coaching set. What about you never changed? For you, you've always been creative. You've always been in your own head. You've always loved the performing arts. Like there's certain themes that are consistent through all 36 years. And then and I think that that's where we design our life. That's how you figure out who you really are. You don't go to the one time you went to a barbecue and think that you're a barbecue going guy. You look at the things that you always keep going back to because they're your passion and your purpose. And maybe those passions and purposes can be created into profit, which hopefully they can, right?
Yes, no, I am I think blessed now to be working on selling the writing thing. I'm launching some new courses on that. In fact, my project this afternoon after I get done with this is I have to record my nonfiction course. Fiction's recording. I have to record nonfiction now. Um, and uh and so that is, I think a nice possibility. I remember when I started my MFA program, I did not feel like I fit in because so many people,
What's MFA again?
a master's of
Forget.
fine arts,
Oh,
and
gotcha.
I
Nice.
have a master's of fine arts in creative writing. And I remember when I first started that, I was amazed at how passionate everyone was about books and reading and stories. And it was kind of an odd first week there. I realized, oh, I don't have that. I don't have that. Like, I don't have that same passion as everyone else does. And it really was kind of one of those, I really talked to the program director. I said, I don't know that I fit in here. And of everyone in my group that applied, only two of us got in, me and one other lady.
Hmm.
And, um, and so I was kind of like, oh, damn, I don't know that I fit in. And unfortunately, in that world, and I didn't understand what getting a terminal degree meant at that time. In that world, if you're going to stay, you can stay, and if you're going to go, you're going to go, and no one's really going to try to keep you there, sort of thing.
What's a terminal
Um,
degree?
So a terminal degree means it's the last in your field. And basically after that you can't do any more. So the masters of fine arts are really a bit of a misnomer because they're really more like PhD programs. So a PhD is a terminal degree, means there's nothing else you can study. So with my MFA, I can actually teach grad school. Like I can go to another
Oh,
MFA program and I can teach at that program. I,
cool.
have the necessary qualifications to teach graduate school. I can teach it any level from kindergarten all the way to grad school,
That's awesome.
all the way through. Um and it was very different. My first master's degree was in political science because my undergrad's in political science because I worked in politics for a long time, which is why we do news and politics here at the Cameron Journal.
Yep.
And it was in political science. I did international relations and I studied terrorism and asymmetrical warfare and all that sort because I thought I was going to be an international lawyer at the time. And and it was a very different thing. There was,
Very
a big in
eclectic, Cameron. You've been to a lot of places.
Yeah, I basically dual wielded humanities because I have two graduate degrees in different fields, and that was the whole thing. And my first graduate program was very different. It was very, how do we get you through? How do we make you successful? All this type of thing. The MFA was very different. It was if you want to be here, you can be here, and if not, go from there. It wasn't until the end of the program I met someone from another department who was also biracial, who explained to me this is a terminal degree program. This is it. Like you're going to be able, you can teach anything you want to after this. And that that attitude, that idea that if you're going to be here, but if not sort of thing, but no one's going to try to stop you or anything like that, was basically I had to decide for myself. And I got a very great piece of advice from my dear friend Liz Williams, who edited my short story collection in the UK. I messaged her one night and I said, when you were doing your PhD at Oxford, how did you get through it? Because I don't think I can do this. And she said, well, I completely failed my first semester. I had to start my whole dissertation project over and I had to change advisors. And I figured out that the only person who was going to get me through this was me. And she said it was sheer bloody mindedness. And I said, okay, thank you. I appreciate it in that just lovely, blunt British that I enjoy so very much.
Hmm.
And I don't mind it. And her and her husband are great friends. I've spent many months with them in Britain and all this sort of thing. And I'm just kind of like, okay. And she doesn't brook any sort of self-pitying or anything. So I, was like, all right, thank you. Great. Have a great day. Because it was night for me. He's a great day for us. Like, have a great day.
Yep.
And I at that moment I just decided, all right, I will have to decide for myself that we're gonna do this. And I battled two absolutely terrible advisors.
Hmm.
Um, I had to fight for my project every single step of the way. It will
What
be
was your
out.
project?
It's called the Sweetgrass Saga. It's right here, actually. I'm in the middle of revising it. Um, I do a paper revision, and here it is. It should be out next year. Um,
Nice.
and it's basically Downton Abbey set in the antebellum South. So I wanted to do the upstairs downstairs dynamic, but with white family and enslaved people. And
Wow.
it's set on the plantation my family comes from in northeastern Mississippi. Um, and I came up with it in 2020 during the pandemic after staying at a lovely antebellum house on a river in Virginia and then doing a writing residency in Tennessee.
Wow.
And
We just did a
yeah,
road trip. Sorry to interrupt you. We did a road trip
no,
from Massachusetts all the way down to the southern part of South Carolina, Beaufort. You ever been to
yeah,
Beaufort?
I do. Yeah, yes, I don't very
And we
well.
drove through all 8 states. We took a little bit of a different road because we wanted to not go through New York City and all that stuff. So we went the scenic
Yeah,
route. But it was
yeah,
it
yeah,
was definitely a fascinating. So I grew up in the New England area,
yeah.
and it's very, very educated. It's very, very. It's like a big college. I mean, New England
Right.
is just a
Yes.
giant college, and it was just fascinating to study the because I've driven across the country too. So I drove in my early 20s out to LA. I actually wanted to
Hmm.
work in show business,
Yeah.
the business side of movies, because I was obsessed with film, and I lived in
Yeah.
LA for a time. It was weird, right two streets down from Sunset Boulevard. Actually, I if I got outside my apartment, I could see the Hollywood sign in the distance. But anyway, so and if you take a right, it's kind of dangerous. If you take a left, you're on Sunset
I was gonna say,
Boulevard.
in that neighborhood, you definitely don't want to park on the street unless you have
Yeah, it's
to.
and the traffic. It's like, oh, the GPS
Yes.
says 2 minutes away. Awesome, no problem. Hour and a
Yeah.
half later, right? But
Yes.
anyways, so I drove across the country, took the middle route, Route 70, Denver, Colorado, through the Rockies. I
Hmm.
hurt my transmission, destroyed my friend's transmission in the Rockies. Don't use cruise control in the Rockies. You know what I'm saying?
No. No,
But
that is
anyway,
correct.
but anyways, so I've done the southern, north to south, and I've done the east to west. Different. Yeah.
It
it's
is.
interesting to see how different the cultures are from east to west versus from north to south. And so
It is.
longitude, latitude, it's been really fascinating for me. And there
I
was a
mean, it,
point in South
yeah.
Carolina where I was like, whoa, the I'm getting flashbacks from the movie Lincoln of being in the Civil War here. This is wild. And again, that's not to be negative towards the people there or anything like that,
There's
but it's
parts of South
definitely
Carolina, it's still 1865. We're aware.
isn't there? It's wild. Holy
Oh yeah.
crap. And
No, I
it's
mean, when I
so
was growing up in Northwest Arkansas, I grew up in the country. We still had KKK cross burnings. I've seen one in real life that in the 90s. That was a thing. Yeah.
I saw Confederate flags, all kinds. It was just
I
still.
saw a Confederate flag on an S10 pickup truck in Ohio, and I'm like, you're in the wrong state, my dudes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very funny.
Whoa. Yeah. But anyways, so I didn't mean to derail you, but continue.
No, no, no. So anyway, in that moment, I decided I had to finish. If I was going to do this program, I was the one that was going to get me through, no one
Yeah,
else.
of
And so
course.
I had to battle two terrible advisors. I had to battle bad advice from other people. I get to the end, someone finally tells me this is harder because it's basically a PhD, but it's in 2 years and not five. This is a terminal degree. You're going to be a permanent member of the American Academy of Letters, of literature, of highly educated people. There's less than 15% of us in the country. You're doing something big. That's why it feels so hard.
Yeah,
And
it
I was
makes
kind of like, oh, because I'm like, I've been to grad school. I walked with them like, I've been to grad school before. 2 years, easy peasy, no muss, no fuss. It was 20 times harder.
no
And
kidding.
so I had to decide for myself I was
Computer
going to get myself
engineering
through. I know. Yeah.
was brutal. And then I got my master's in business after that. I was like, this is a piece of cake. I was doing Fourier transforms and Laplace transforms in signal analysis class with the geniuses that make
Yes.
luckily there's a bell curve and they screw it up. But like then I went to my MBA and I
Yeah.
think it's two things. Number one, it's just easier than engineering, let's be honest. And number two, I'm just naturally more gifted at business. So anyways, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
No,
trust
no,
me,
no,
I know the
absolutely. Yeah.
deal
Yeah. No, I
because
mean, for me, my undergrad political science program was not up to date. So my first trip through grad school was fraught with difficulty because I just wasn't well prepared by my undergrad program.
yeah.
And then I got through that and I had a lot of great support and a lot of great people and all this sort of thing. And I thought this would be like that and it wasn't. And so I had to kind of basically decide for myself. And I did. And I got through once I kind of at the end figured out what I was really doing. And then it kind of all made more sense and all this type of thing. And so I was like, okay. I kind of got through that. And I kind of a little bit forget now why I was telling you the story. But suffice it to
Because the
say,
3.6 version of Cameron. We're trying to figure out the
yes,
3 point. And by the way, I do adore this conversation. I do just have another meeting, so I know we got to wrap it up. But
yes,
also,
yes,
I am
yes.
curious as to what is the 3.6 version of Cameron. And to anyone watching or listening, what is the 3.2 version of you, or if you're 32 or 2.8? I think it's a cool way because our iPhones, they update and they improve over time, both hardware and software. And I think that's a cool analogy. Of course, I'm a computer engineer, so I'm biased, but I think that's
Right.
a cool analogy for our mindset. I think that's a cool analogy for, you're a different version of you. You're still the through line and the theme of who Cameron is still there. And some parts of that never changes, but you're different in undergrad than you are in grad, and different in grad than MFA than you are in graduate. And so we are all hopefully next leveling ourselves and updating our mindset and updating our behavior and updating to a more authentic, hopefully, version of ourselves. So that's
Yes, yes, no, no, and I'll wrap it up and get you on your way. But all of this long to say that it is, all of this kind of has enabled me to do this. And now I'm trying. Now I guess the modern thing is trying to monetize it and turn it into a thing and take the knowledge and the magic of the Cameron Journal and bring it to business owners who don't understand the news and trying to help people tell their stories better and do these courses and all this type of thing. And finally, I guess maybe trying to finally turn this crazy thing that I do into something that's more profitable because the kind of the broke starving artist life is really fun. It was fun 10 years ago, not so much now. Um and and trying to make it all make sense for today. And as I have discovered, that is no easy thing. And I think for me, just because been to all the places and done a lot of crazy things and all this sort of thing, it's kind of, I think you get to that point of what does it all mean? What does it all add up to? And I've kind of figured out sometimes not much. Sometimes it was just a cool experience. Sometimes it was just a thing. Sometimes it is going somewhere and leading somewhere, for better or for worse. And it's yeah, I'm not quite sure what any of this means anymore or what it's all adding up to, other than, I keep doing this for the readership. Every time I think about quitting or moving on, I inevitably get an email or a message from somebody who says, I really loved your episode, or I really love this article, or this really helped me, or whatever have you. And I'm kind of like,
Nice.
well, that's why I keep doing this.
That's good. That's a good
Um,
through line. Yeah, I think that's
um
important.
sort of thing. And that, so kind of, for the people, became the why, especially
Nice.
when I don't like 90% of what I do. It helps to have someone who is really helped and affected by it, to say, yeah, this really helped me, I really love this. Be kind of like, all right, well, I guess we'll do her for a while longer.
Yeah, the last anecdote I'll give, this is my formula: grow into the most authentic, best version of me, then serve my greatest level of contribution, and then do that for a profit, and then rinse and repeat, right? Reinvest that back into my growth. And so I think you're doing kind of the same thing. And I'm here to serve. I've grown behind the scenes, and then I'm here to serve. And then hopefully this will be profitable in some capacity, indirectly or directly, because I'm a business coach, and I hope business owners align themselves with their purpose and their calling for a profit. At the end of the day, if you're doing it for the people and that's first, I think that the profitability long term can accumulate really nicely. Whereas if you are going for profit first, like I did unintentionally when I was younger, I feel like you lose yourself. And so good for you. And hopefully you won't be a starving artist in any capacity. But if you have to be to stay in alignment and you're fulfilled, that's what matters.
Well, it's something where one of the reasons I did my MFA program is I kind of figured out I was never a corporate type. I'm basically unemployable. Um, and so I was kind of like, well, I did not have any degrees or qualifications in what I actually did, which is writing in media, which I've done for the bulk of my life. And so I said, and I was against doing MFA for a long, long time. And I said, well, I think it's time. And the pandemic, I was stuck at home anyway. It seemed like a great time to do it. And it
Nice.
was. It was really great.
Nice.
Um and so I kind of was like, all right, let's give myself some options, because I can teach, I can do this, that, and the other thing, and in publishing, and I work my publisher, I also work for them in another capacity. Um
Nice.
and it's been great for the business because we're doing a podcast network, and I haven't really talked about that, but watch this space, everybody. And so yeah, so I mean it is all kind of starting to come together. But I agree with you. For me, once I kind of understood how I was impacting people,
Yep.
I was kind of like, okay, I can hang my hat on that. I
Nice.
can hang my hat on this is really meaningful to people. And I,
Yep.
start conversations. I get to talk to wonderful people like you, and people, really get into this. And I mean, I was surprised. I did a live stream for the State of the Union this year, and it was extremely popular. I had no idea people would
Nice.
sit there for 2.5 hours and watch me commentate. But someone said, well, yeah, because you tell all the stories about who this is and what this tradition and why that's on the wall. Because I know all that stuff because I
Nice.
worked in government, sort of thing. And it's like, well,
Nice.
yeah, that's people don't know this. So I kind of say, here's why this is, and here's who those people are, and all this sort of thing. And my Canadian friend, he's like, I'm not even from your country, and I watched the whole thing. And so I was kind of like, all right, I guess we'll do some more live streams, so sort of thing. And so that's what, kind of gets me going on the days when I don't want to get going is, all right, the people kind of expect this sort of thing, and that's what kind of keeps me going. But
Podcast by Cameron for the people. I like it.
yes,
Cameron,
but
I do got to jump though because I got
I know,
another
I know, I
meeting,
know.
but
So let's
appreciate you.
let's do this at the end. We do plugs.
Yep.
I know, I'm with you. I'm with you. We're wrapping up right now. Tell us where we can find you online and where we can learn more about you, and we'll get you on your way.
Cameron, thank you. I appreciate this. I enjoyed this conversation a lot. It went a lot of ways. So thank you, first and foremost.
I told you
Keep
it
doing
would.
what you're doing, sir. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you very
The
much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So where you can find me, ALAN at nextleveluniverse.com is my email. ALAN nextleveluniverse.com, spelled just like it sounds. If you're going to email me, please provide context to the show because I get a lot of spam like everybody, right?
Yep.
And then you've got nextleveluniverse.com is the website, nextleveluniverse.com, spelled just like it sounds. And then the podcast is Next Level University. And the idea is come learn holistic self improvement in your pocket every day, 1% improvement per day from anywhere on the planet, completely free. Health, wealth, life, and love. And so it is an improvement oriented self improvement podcast where you're trying to become the best version of yourself in a nutshell. And we do an episode every single day. And we're a mentor in your pocket every day. That's kind of the goal because we both grew up without fathers, and Kevin and I, my co-host, and we want to be the male role models we never really had. And for someone who has an open heart, open mind, open hands, willing to work, we want to be there. And so, yeah, you can check that out. If you want to build a bigger, better, brighter future, that's the pun, the metaphor of next level. There, no matter how far you've come, there's always a next level. And if you want to get to that next level, we can help guide you along the way. So thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you much for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast.
You are welcome. Thank you.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you.